My name is Leona. I'm 27, living in a small two-bedroom apartment with my parents and younger sister, Aspen. My life has always felt like a balancing act, but lately, the stakes had gotten higher. The bills were piling up, and every time I turned around, there seemed to be another unexpected expense or responsibility. But it wasn't just about the money. It was the feeling that everything I did was expected, like I had no choice but to keep supporting the family. That evening, I sat down for a family dinner, the kind that used to be a comfortable tradition, but now felt more like an obligation. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and Aspen was glued to her phone, scrolling through something. She barely looked up as my dad started talking. Leona, he said, sliding a financial breakdown across the table, we've gone over the numbers for the month. Here's the breakdown of what you'll need to contribute. I stared at the sheet. Rent, utilities, the shared internet bill, the car insurance, all neatly outlined with a dollar amount next to each. The total was more than half of my monthly paycheck. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my face neutral. Just keep it in mind, my dad added, sipping his beer casually as if the weight of those numbers wasn't suffocating me. We're all in this together. You know how it goes? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the sheet back at him and tell him how tired I was of being the financial backup. I wanted to ask why Aspen wasn't expected to contribute at all, but I knew how that conversation would go. She was younger, she had time to figure things out. I had my job at the bank, sure, but that was never enough. Somehow, everything always fell to me. Aspen barely looked up from her phone. Whatever, she muttered, twirling a strand of hair around her finger, uninterested. I clenched my jaw, trying to swallow my frustration. My mother, always the peacemaker, kept her head down and stirred her salad. She would never say anything, never rock the boat. That was my role. Don't worry about it too much, honey, she said, her voice soft. Just do what you can. You're doing a lot already. It wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough. As I sat there, nodding and pretending to agree, my mind raced. Why wasn't Aspen expected to help? Why wasn't there any acknowledgement of everything I was doing? The constant stress of making ends meet, of juggling work and bills and family expectations, it was wearing me thin, and it felt like no one cared. They never asked how I was holding up. They never considered the weight I carried. I excused myself as soon as I could, muttering something about needing to finish a report for work. I retreated to my room, the door clicking shut behind me. Sitting at my desk, I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank balance. The numbers on the screen felt like they were mocking me. I had just enough to cover my contribution to the bills and some basic groceries, but anything beyond that would be a stretch. I closed the bank tab and opened a new spreadsheet. I started entering the household expenses, calculating what I was expected to pay versus what Aspen had contributed. Nothing. Not a single dollar. It wasn't fair. But I had no idea what to do about it. The system my parents had built, where I carried all the financial weight, was suffocating me. I was stuck. The more I looked at the spreadsheet, the more resentment bubbled up inside me. I couldn't keep doing this. I closed the spreadsheet and sat back in my chair, staring at the empty room. It felt like the walls were closing in, like there was no escape. How long could I keep this up? I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. The familiar weight of the financial burden was settling back onto my shoulders. My second job at the diner helped, but it never felt like enough. I felt like I was treading water, just barely keeping up with the current of bills, demands, and my family's expectations. I opened my bank app first. The balance wasn't a surprise, it never was. There was just enough to cover the upcoming bills and a little left for groceries. Not much more. My parents had their share of expenses too. I paid the rent, the utilities, and the internet bill. It was always the same, always on me. But tonight, I wasn't just dealing with the usual household expenses. I was preparing for the confrontation that had been building for months, maybe years. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I clicked open a new document, an expense tracker. My hands were steady, but my mind was anything but. I began typing in the numbers, each line a reminder of just how much I was shouldering alone. Household bills, rent, $1,000, utilities, $300, groceries, $200, internet, $50, car insurance, $120. Each of these amounts was mine to cover, month after month, while my sister Aspen did nothing. She had a part-time job at a local coffee shop, but she hardly ever paid a cent. And when she did, it was usually just her share of the groceries, maybe a few bucks toward the electric bill. She had no sense of urgency, no real responsibility. My thoughts drifted to Aspen as I typed her name at the top of the next section, Aspen's share of expenses. I hesitated before adding anything to the spreadsheet. Should I even bother? It wasn't like she'd ever contributed seriously, and yet, there it was, her name, looming on the list like a ghost. I typed in an empty line, then quickly erased it. I knew what Aspen had been doing behind my back. I knew she'd been using my credit card without asking. I'd seen the charges, the small purchases that kept popping up. Nothing huge, just a few extra lattes here, a cute new jacket there. But it was the principle that bothered me. Every time she swiped my card, it was like another invisible weight pressing down on me. I checked my credit card statement. Sure enough, there they were. Charges for cosmetics, meal kits, a few subscription services I didn't recognize. None of it was outrageous, but that wasn't the point. It was that I hadn't given her permission, and she'd acted as though I wouldn't notice. I typed out the amounts, item by item, adding them to my list. Unauthorized charges cosmetics, $45. Streaming subscription, $15. Meal kit, $50. It was small stuff, but the pattern was clear. It had become a habit. She just kept taking without asking. I exhaled slowly, my fingers pausing above the keys. What was I supposed to do about it? How had I let it get this far? There was a sick feeling in my stomach as I added everything up. The expenses, the bills, the fact that Aspen was taking from me without any understanding of how hard I was working to make ends meet. But as I added the final figures to the spreadsheet, something inside me clicked. I realized I couldn't keep doing this, not just for my parents, not just for Aspen, but for me. I needed control, real control. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about taking back some piece of my life, some shred of autonomy. The weight of my financial situation felt crushing, but I could see a way out, a path where I didn't have to bear the entire load. It was a small step, but as I saved the spreadsheet and closed my laptop, a part of me felt a little lighter. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I stood up and walked over to the window, watching the night stretch out before me. There was something strangely liberating in the quiet. I realized I wasn't running out of options. I was starting to find the way forward. It wasn't just about managing bills anymore. It was about regaining my independence, my sense of self. I wasn't sure what it looked like yet, but I was done being the family's financial crutch. This was just the beginning. The confrontation had been building for days, maybe weeks. I couldn't shake the frustration that had been quietly simmering in the back of my mind every time Aspen acted as if nothing was wrong. She kept using my credit card, small purchases here and there that I'd let slide at first, figuring maybe she forgot to ask. But after the third charge for something totally unnecessary, I couldn't let it go any longer. I stood in the hallway outside Aspen's room, feeling the heat rise in my chest. She had no idea what was coming. "Aspen!" I called, knocking lightly on her door. "Yeah?" she replied without looking up from her phone. She was sprawled across her bed, her eyes glued to some app I could barely recognize. The earbuds were still hanging around her neck. "I need to talk to you. Now," she groaned, pulling one earbud out. "What now, Leona?" I opened the door, walking in and standing in front of her, arms crossed. "You've been using my credit card again." She looked at me, her expression nonchalant, almost bored. "Oh, that. Yeah, I just used it for some stuff. You didn't change the login after I bought those textbooks months ago, so it's fine, right?" "Fine? Really?" I felt my frustration surge as I took a step forward. "You can't just use my credit card whenever you want. I didn't give you permission for any of those charges." Her lips parted in that familiar way, like she was ready to argue. But she wasn't in the mood to really fight. She barely cared. "Come on, Leona. I'm your sister. You were always saying we should help each other out. Besides, it's not like it was anything big. Just a couple of beauty products and a subscription or whatever." I stood there, frozen, as a wave of anger washed over me. "A couple of beauty products?" I repeated. "Aspen, it's not about the amount. It's about respect. I work hard to pay for everything around here, and you just take without asking. Do you have any idea what that does to me?" She rolled her eyes. "You're so dramatic. It's no big deal. I'll pay you back when I can." "When I can? Are you kidding me? You don't get it, Aspen." I could feel the frustration building, but I was trying to keep my cool. "You've never paid your way in this house. I've been covering everything, our bills, groceries, my bills. And yet you act like it's nothing. Like I'm supposed to just keep letting you take and take and take. At that, her attitude shifted a little. She propped herself up on one arm and let out a sigh. Well, what do you want me to do, Leona? I don't make enough to cover half of this stuff. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. You know that. I don't have a career yet. I'm just trying to live. Her voice softened, but that didn't make me feel any better. My blood still boiled, but there was a sinking feeling in my stomach. This was the same thing she always said. And that's fine, I said, taking a deep breath. But that doesn't mean you get to use my stuff whenever you feel like it. You don't have a plan, but I do. I'm stuck here, carrying all of this on my shoulders, and it's exhausting. I don't need to be the one doing it all. She was quiet for a moment, and for the first time, I felt like she wasn't completely tuned out of the conversation. I get it, but I'm not like you, Leona. You have everything figured out. You have a job, and you're always the one who handles everything for us. There was a silence between us as I stood there, staring at her. She wasn't looking at me anymore. I just need some time to figure it out, she mumbled, as though trying to explain away her behavior, but it wasn't enough. I felt that cold pit in my stomach widen. I could feel myself growing tired, tired of being the one who always had to pick up the slack, tired of feeling like I was drowning in responsibility while Aspen floated through life. Just then, our mother stepped into the doorway, breaking the silence. What's going on in here? I turned to face her, my resolve hardening. This wasn't just about Aspen, it was about all of them. I was the only one who carried the weight, and I was tired of it. Aspen's been using my credit card again without asking, I said, my voice steady. She's been running up charges, and I'm done letting it slide. Mom looked at me, and her face softened. Leona, you know Aspen's just figuring things out. She doesn't have a full-time job yet. She's still young. You need to be more understanding. You're more established. You don't have to worry about things the way she does. I could feel the anger rising again, but I bit my tongue. It wasn't fair. I was being made to feel like I was being unreasonable for asking for accountability, for wanting my sister to respect boundaries. I wasn't her safety net. I'm not being unreasonable, I said, though my voice had a sharp edge. I'm asking for respect, for her to not take advantage of me just because I'm the one holding things together. Mom sighed. You're both family. Just help each other out. I looked from her to Aspen, feeling utterly alone. Help each other out, I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. That's what I've been doing, Mom. But at some point, I need to stop helping people who don't even notice the work I'm putting in. With that, I walked out of the room, feeling drained and betrayed. My sister was never going to understand. And my parents? They just kept enabling her. I was stuck in a role that felt suffocating, and it was time to make a change. But I didn't know where to begin. The numbers were starting to blur together. My fingers hovered above the keyboard as I stared at my credit card statement, still unable to fully digest what I was seeing. The screen in front of me was filled with charges, small ones at first, just enough to go unnoticed, then larger, more obvious purchases that made my stomach tighten, cosmetics, streaming subscriptions, meal kits, all traced back to Aspen. I clicked through each item, feeling the anger rise in my chest with every line I read. She had done this again, used my card without asking, without even telling me. I could feel my jaw clenching as I scrolled, adding everything up in my mind. She had taken over $250 without a word. I closed the browser window with a snap, my frustration boiling over. I couldn't keep letting this slide. I had tried to be the responsible one, the one who held everything together, but Aspen kept pushing my boundaries, and my parents, they kept enabling her. I knew I couldn't let this go on. I needed to figure out how to fix this, how to protect myself. I pulled up a new tab and began researching how to dispute credit card charges, but the more I read, the more I hesitated. If I contested the charges, it would mean exposing Aspen. If she found out I was going this far, there would be more arguments, more fallout. I wasn't ready for that yet. I needed something more. I needed a way to make sure this didn't happen again. The idea came to me slowly, like a seed planted in the back of my mind, waiting to sprout. I could protect myself financially, not just from Aspen, but from everyone else who relied on me too much. I thought about my coworker, Ezra. He was always talking about real estate, about how he was planning to buy property in the future. It was a dream of his, something he had been slowly working towards, and he always said it was the key to building wealth, to not being dependent on anyone else. I scrolled through my phone, searching for Ezra's contact. I needed to ask him more about what he was doing. It felt like a small spark of hope, the first real chance to gain control. Maybe this wasn't just about managing my credit card statement, it was about building a future where I didn't feel suffocated by my family's expectations. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ezra. Hey, I was thinking of buying a small property. Thought you might want to hear about it. Let me know if you're interested. I smiled faintly as I typed back. Tell me more. As I put my phone down, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about paying bills anymore. I could see a way out of this, a way to take control of my life and my finances, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I opened a new browser window and searched for high-yield savings accounts, the first step in something bigger. This wasn't just about fighting to pay bills. This was about laying the foundation for a future that didn't rely on my family's demands, one where I could make decisions for myself. The numbers in front of me started to lose their power as I opened the account, a small but significant step towards my independence. I had a long way to go, but this felt like the beginning. A quiet rebellion, one I wasn't sure how to explain yet, but it was mine. And that was all I needed for now. I leaned back in my chair and sighed, looking out the window. The night had settled in, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel quite so trapped. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting long shadows on the floor as I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone. The quiet of the house felt heavier than usual, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. My thoughts kept returning to the same place, the weight of everything, the bills, the resentment, and my growing realization that my parents' reliance on me was deeper than I ever imagined. Ezra's words echoed in my mind. You should start thinking about buying property, Leona. Get out of that situation before you get stuck in it forever. He had been talking about the potential for financial independence, about building wealth, but it was more than that. Ezra had planted a seed that was beginning to grow into something concrete. I was still deep in thought when my phone buzzed. It was a message from him. Hey, I know we've been talking about real estate, but I heard something interesting today at work. Did you know your parents' mortgage is behind? They're almost 2 months late. The words hit me like a cold slap. 2 months behind on their mortgage. That wasn't just a missed payment or a simple delay. It was a sign of financial instability, and it explained a lot. Why they'd been leaning so heavily on me, why they'd been asking for more and more help. They hadn't been teaching me responsibility. They'd been fostering dependence. My steady income had been their lifeline, and I had never even realized it. My heart sank as I processed the information. I thought I had been helping out of love, out of a sense of duty. But this was something else entirely. My hard work, my sacrifice, had been used to prop up their lifestyle, to cover up the cracks in their own financial foundation. I needed to see this for myself. I pulled up my spreadsheet, the one that had become my method of tracking everything. It felt like my personal ledger of burdens. I added a new row to the bottom. Mortgage. Next to it, I typed in a placeholder amount, $2,500, roughly the cost of the monthly mortgage payment I had indirectly been covering. The numbers were adding up now. It wasn't just rent, utilities, groceries. It wasn't just Aspen's unpaid share. My parents' financial struggle was part of the equation. They had been using me for years, never asking for help directly, but always making sure I would step in, always making me feel responsible. I felt a cold rush of clarity. This wasn't just about managing the household or keeping the peace. This was about control. My parents had relied on me for so long that they couldn't see how suffocating it was. And I had let it go on, because I thought that was just what families did, support each other. But this was more than that. The realization hit me harder than I expected. My hand trembled as I added the mortgage amount to my list of contributions. I wasn't just helping, I was carrying their weight too. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. What had I been doing all this time? Why had I kept saying yes, even when it hurt? Why hadn't I seen what was really happening? My parents weren't teaching me responsibility. They were using me to keep their lives afloat, and I was too afraid to say no. Ezra had been right all along. It was time to break free. I wasn't just a cog in their machine anymore. I was running my own life, and I needed to start taking control of it. Not just with my finances, but with my future. I opened a new tab on my computer and started researching ways to protect myself financially, ways to build wealth without being tied to my family's expectations. It wasn't just about paying bills anymore. It was about regaining my independence, about making sure I didn't become a tool for their dependency. I closed my laptop with a quiet click and sat there for a moment, just breathing. It was time. I wasn't just paying bills anymore, I was preparing to walk away from this life, and I was finally ready. It had been a few days since I had learned about the delinquent mortgage. The weight of the discovery hadn't quite left me, and I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to process it. My parents had used my steady income to cover their financial gaps, and I'd unknowingly been the lifeline that kept them afloat. But that was it. I had to stop. I couldn't keep carrying them. By the time morning came, I was exhausted but determined. There was no going back now. The path ahead of me was clear, and it wasn't just about managing the next payment, it was about reclaiming my future, not just my finances. I had already taken the first step. The high-yield savings account was in place, but I knew that wasn't enough. I needed a plan, something bigger, something that would break the cycle. That's when I remembered Ezra's advice: buy property. At the time, it had sounded like a nice thought, something in the distant future. But now, it was more than that. It was the escape plan I needed. I opened my laptop, doing a quick search for local properties that might be in my budget. The idea of buying a house felt overwhelming, but it didn't seem as impossible now that I knew it was my way out. I had the stability of my full-time job and the flexibility of my second job to back me up. This was possible. Then, a message from Ezra popped up on my screen. "Hey, you still interested in buying that property?" "I can help," I typed back quickly. "Yes, definitely. What do I need to do?" I felt a rush of relief as Ezra explained how to start, how I could set up an LLC to buy property discreetly, avoiding any complications with my family. He also recommended working with someone who understood the real estate game, someone I could trust, someone who wouldn't ask questions about why I needed to keep it low profile. That's when Mrs. Vega came to mind. She was a semi-retired real estate agent I'd met through a mutual friend. She'd always been friendly and reliable. I remembered her telling me she was cutting back on her work, but she might still be interested in helping out clients who were serious about buying. She'd been the one who'd helped me with a small investment property a couple of years ago, and now I was ready to take that next step. I called her up, my nerves fraying just a little as I explained my situation. "Leona, honey, I'm so glad you called. Let's get together and start putting something together for you," she said, her voice warm and reassuring. "Thank you, Mrs. Vega. I really appreciate this," I replied, feeling a little more confident with each passing moment. That afternoon, we met in her office. Mrs. Vega, with her glasses perched on the edge of her nose and a cup of coffee beside her, walked me through the details. We discussed the best way to structure the purchase so it wouldn't raise any flags with my family, using an LLC and a pseudonym to ensure my privacy. "There are properties out there for people like you, Leona," she said, flipping through a few listings. "Houses that are priced lower than market value but have a lot of potential. We'll find you something in a good neighborhood. Nothing too flashy, just a solid investment for you to live in and eventually grow." Her experience calmed my nerves. By the time I left her office, I had a plan. Mrs. Vega was going to set up a viewing for a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, and she promised it would be priced within my budget. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was happening. I was taking control of my future. The following days were a blur of phone calls and paperwork. I made arrangements to set up the LLC, working with a lawyer I trusted. At night, I began packing quietly. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be taking these steps. But the more I packed, the more certain I became that I was doing the right thing. I stored some of my things in my car, small boxes and personal items I knew I wouldn't need immediately. It wasn't just the physical packing that was important, it was the mental shift. I was preparing for my escape, for the day when I could finally walk out the door and leave everything behind. I was meticulous with the timing. I rehearsed every move in my head, when I'd leave, how I'd avoid confrontation. I knew my family would be busy, especially with Aspen being distracted by her own life, so I didn't have to worry about them noticing the little things. It was the first time in years I felt like I was actually in control. There was a strange sense of empowerment in knowing that I could make this change, that I could take this step toward independence. As I loaded the last of my belongings into my car, a small private smile tugged at the corner of my lips. I had done it. I had created a plan, and now I was ready to follow through. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and I knew there would be consequences. But for the first time, I was making the choice for myself. No more resentment, no more feeling trapped. This was my life, and I was going to live it the way I deserved. And when the day came, when I finally walked out of this house, I would do it with my head held high. It was time to break free. The day had arrived. I had spent months preparing for this moment, planning, organizing, and executing every detail down to the minute. My heart raced as I stood in the living room, looking around one last time. The house that had been my prison for so long now seemed like a fading chapter in my life. The walls that had once felt like they were closing in were now nothing but an empty space I was ready to leave behind. I had packed everything I could without raising suspicion: clothes, personal items, important papers, carefully stashed in my car, and a storage unit down the road. Anything too noticeable, too heavy to carry in one trip, I'd leave behind for now. My plan was simple: get out undetected. I had timed it perfectly. My parents were out running errands, and Aspen was still at work. This was the window I needed. Quietly, I grabbed the envelope with my letter, the last piece of the puzzle. I had written it earlier in the morning, calm, to the point, and most importantly, honest. I couldn't afford to be emotional or try to explain myself to them. Not anymore. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, knowing it would be the first place they'd look when they came home. There was no bitterness in my words, only the truth. I'm leaving. I need to take control of my life. You've all relied on me for too long. I can't keep doing it. I need to go. I didn't need to say more than that. I paused, taking a long, deep breath before heading for the front door. As I stepped outside, the weight on my shoulders lightened. It wasn't just the physical act of leaving, it was the emotional release. For the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing fresh air. I drove the familiar route to my new place, each turn feeling surreal, like I was stepping into a different world, one where I wasn't shackled by expectations or guilt. My new home wasn't grand, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine. A small, modest house tucked in a quiet neighborhood, perfect for someone who needed peace and space to grow. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat for a moment in the car, staring at the house. I had never thought this day would come. Leaving my family wasn't just about escaping. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my independence, and my right to live on my terms. I grabbed the few bags I had packed and stepped inside. The house smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. As I explored the space, I imagined what it would be like to truly start fresh, without the constant pressure of financial burdens or the weight of their expectations. The spare room had a perfect little corner that I knew would make a great art studio. I hadn't painted in years. My art had been something I'd abandoned long ago, suffocated by the responsibilities I had taken on. But now, as I set up the small space, I realized how much I had missed this part of myself, the part that could create, the part that had been buried under years of sacrifice. Later that night, I settled into the living room, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only sound. My phone buzzed once, then again, and again. I had expected it. My family wasn't going to just let me go without trying to bring me back. The first message was from my mom. "Leona, where are you? Why aren't you answering? We need to talk." Then another from Aspen. "Mom says you're gone? What's going on?" My heart didn't skip a beat. I had expected this. My family would need to understand that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It wasn't about abandoning them, it was about saving myself. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat back on the couch, taking in the silence. For the first time in a long time, it was peaceful. There was no noise, no demands, no constant feeling of obligation weighing me down. I realized that my silence wasn't just for them. It was for me too. I was no longer answering to anyone but myself. The next morning, I sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of coffee in my hand, when the texts came in again. The pattern hadn't changed. My family was still trying to pull me back into their web, still acting as though I was obligated to take care of them. I decided to take a step further and put the next piece of my plan in motion. I began setting up a small business. It wasn't a huge leap, but it was the next step in asserting my independence. This place was mine, and I would make it work on my own. The phone call came around midday. It was my mom again. Her voice was shaky, like she was trying to hold back tears. "Leona," she said, "where are you? Why did you leave like this? We're worried. Don't you care about us?" I leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of her words, but it didn't shake me. I had to do this for myself. "I care about all of you, but I can't keep living for you. I need to live for me. You've had your chance to see how much I've done, but this isn't my life anymore." There was silence on the other end, followed by a faint sob. "I'm sorry, Mom, but this is what's best for me," I added, my voice firm. "I need this. I need to find who I am again." I hung up, leaving the conversation open-ended. It wasn't that I didn't care. It wasn't that I didn't love them. But I couldn't live their lives for them anymore. I needed to live mine. As the day went on, the messages continued to pour in. But I was done responding. I had made my decision. I had left the past behind me. And now, for the first time in years, I could begin to focus on the things I had given up: my art, my freedom, my life. I wasn't just running away, I was walking towards something better, something of my own. And for the first time, I felt peace. The knock at the door startled me, the sudden intrusion into my quiet space breaking the peace I had fought so hard to create. My fingers hovered over the canvas in front of me, and for a moment, I thought about ignoring it. But I knew I couldn't. This was inevitable. I stood, took a deep breath, and walked toward the door. As I opened it, there they were, my family. My mom, dad, and Aspen, all standing in front of me looking lost. The sight was almost pitiful. "Leona, we need to talk," my mom said, her voice tight with worry. I stepped aside, letting them in without a word. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. Aspen was the first to speak, her voice a little more emotional than usual. "Why did you leave? What happened?" She sounded hurt, but there was an underlying frustration in her tone too. The resentment was barely hidden, but that was nothing new. I took a moment to look at them all. My parents, who had relied on me for years, and Aspen, who had taken everything for granted. But I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel bad. I was finally free. My father, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Leona, we don't understand. We've been trying to keep things together. Your mother, she's been struggling since you left. We thought you were part of the solution. Why would you leave us like this?" I met his eyes, steady and unwavering. "The problem was never just money. It was the control. You and Mom kept using me to fill the gaps in your lives, never giving me a chance to stand on my own." My voice was calm, but the words came out sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. My mom's face softened, her eyes welling up with tears. "Leona, you know we didn't mean for things to turn out this way. We just didn't know how to ask for help. You were always the strong one. You've always been the one who could handle everything." I felt a flicker of emotion, but it was gone just as quickly. "That's the problem, Mom. You never asked me what I wanted. You just assumed I would be there, holding everything up for you. But that's not what family is supposed to be about. Family isn't just about leaning on the one person who never says no." "Leona," Aspen interrupted, her voice sharp. "You don't get it. We're your family. You can't just walk away from us like this. You can't just shut us out because you think it's too hard." I turned to her slowly, a coldness creeping into my tone. "No, Aspen, you don't get it. You've never understood the pressure I've been under, the sacrifices I've made to keep this family afloat. But I'm done. I'm done being the one who has to make it all work, even when nobody else bothers to help." Her face twisted, as if she was going to argue, but then she paused. She seemed to realize, perhaps for the first time, that I wasn't just venting. This was real and I was serious. "Leona, this is crazy," my dad said, his voice breaking slightly. "You can't just leave us like this. You were supposed to help us. You were supposed to be the one we could rely on." "I did help," I replied, my voice steady despite the tension. "I helped for years. I put my life on hold to support all of you, and now I need to live my life. I need to find who I am again." My mom stepped forward, her face crumpled with worry. "What about us? What about your family?" she asked, her voice small. I paused for a moment, letting the silence fill the space between us. Then, with as much calm as I could muster, I replied, "I'll always love you, but I can't keep doing this. I have to put myself first now." The room fell quiet. No one spoke for a long time, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Aspen fidgeted with her phone, clearly unsure of what to say next. My dad looked defeated, and my mom, though she didn't cry outright, had the look of someone who had lost something precious. But I wasn't going back. Not this time. Finally, Aspen looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You're really going to stick to this? You're going to just leave everything behind and start fresh, like nothing happened?" "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "It's time for me to move on." I stepped toward the door, slowly closing it behind me. But before I did, I turned and looked them all in the eye one last time. "I'm sorry it had to be this way. But this is my life now. You'll be okay. You'll figure it out." As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The last ties to my old life were severed, and I was free. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad, I was finally at peace. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I had taken control of my future, and nothing, no one could take that away from me. It was a few hours later when I received another message from Aspen. You've really hurt all of us, but if you're so set on doing this, fine. Just remember, you're still family, and you can't change that. I stared at the text for a long moment before responding. Family isn't about guilt, Aspen. It's about respect, and I'm done waiting for that. And with that, I finally felt the last of the weight lift. It had been a few weeks since I left, but the quiet of my new life still felt surreal. I sat in the corner of my small living room, my eyes flicking from the canvas in front of me to the open window that let in the soft, late afternoon sunlight. There was no noise, no pressure, just peace. The weight of everything, the bills, the constant demands from my family, the feeling of being trapped was gone. I was no longer a part of the endless cycle. For the first time, I was able to breathe. I had spent the last few days getting settled in, setting up my small business, and making sure the foundations of my new life were secure. The transition wasn't easy, and there were moments when doubt crept in, but I knew deep down that I was doing the right thing, the only thing. I had checked my bank account again this morning, and it felt strange to see a balance that was mine, completely mine. The constant pressure to support others, to be the one holding everything together, was gone. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. And for the first time in years, I felt in control of my future. As I sat there with my coffee, the phone buzzed on the table beside me. I picked it up to see a text from Aspen. My chest tightened, but I didn't hesitate to open it. "Hey, Leona, I'm applying for a job at the new cafe downtown. Can you help me with the application? I'm not sure if my resume is up to par. I know you're good at this stuff." It was a simple message, but it hit me harder than I expected. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I didn't feel the same urgency anymore, that need to jump in and fix things for everyone. Sure, I'll take a look. But remember, you're the one who has to make this happen. I'm not doing it for you anymore. I paused before sending it, realizing that my response wasn't just about the job application, it was about finally detaching. For so long, I had been the one doing everything for everyone, silently carrying their weight. I had sacrificed my own life to help them live theirs, but now I could see clearly. I had to stop. I sent the message and leaned back in my chair, the quiet moment settling around me again. Aspen's message had been a test, and I had passed it. She was still leaning on me, expecting me to carry her. But this time, I didn't bend. This time, I stood firm. Later that day, I walked into the small room I had set aside as my art studio. The room was still bare, but there was a sense of possibility in the air now. I stood in front of the canvas, paintbrush in hand, and hesitated for a moment. I hadn't painted in years. I had put it all aside when life got too heavy, when there was no space left for my own dreams. But now I had room to breathe, room to create. I dipped the brush into the paint, the colors flowing onto the canvas. The brush strokes were slow at first, tentative like I was testing the waters. But as I painted, something inside me shifted. With every line, every color, I felt more connected to myself, to who I was before all of this chaos had started. The weight of the past, the years of silence, of carrying everyone's burdens, seemed to lift. It wasn't gone completely, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't bound to it. I was reclaiming my passion, my freedom, one stroke at a time. The next few days passed in a blur of work, small triumphs, and new routines. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to thrive. The balance I had longed for had finally found its place in my life. One evening, as I sat down to dinner, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Aspen. I hesitated before looking at it, bracing myself. "I'm sorry, Leona. I didn't get the job. I guess I'm not cut out for it. Thanks for trying, though. I'm sorry I keep asking you for help." I felt a small twinge of something. Was it guilt? Sympathy? Maybe both. But more than that, I felt something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt free. I put my phone down without responding immediately, taking a deep breath. I had been that person for so long, the one who fixed everything, who tried to make things better. But it wasn't my job to save anyone, and it wasn't my responsibility to carry the weight of their mistakes. I wasn't their savior anymore. I was just me. And for the first time in a long time, I liked who I was becoming. The next morning, I woke up early, ready to start the day. There were still things I needed to do, things I wanted to accomplish, but for the first time, I wasn't rushing through life. I was moving at my own pace, focusing on what mattered to me. My business was growing, and so was I. I thought about my painting from the night before, and how each brushstroke had felt like a small act of defiance, a reclaiming of something I had long buried. As I stood in front of the canvas again, I smiled. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. I was free, and for the first time, I was living on my own terms, and nothing felt better than that.